Welcome to the first installment of the ITHEM Innovation Series on megatrends and their impact on society, consumers and company. We'll do 12 in total. An introduction about the main drivers behind these trends, then 10 segments where we analyze each of the megatrends, and a conclusion about what it all means for marketing and innovation. I'm Joost Van Nispen. I'm founder of ITHEM, the Institute for Innovation at esic Business and Marketing School. On Twitter, I'm Joost Tom. Before we start, I would like to thank my fellow colleagues of the ITHEM Megatrends Task Force. We first carried out research among faculty members of ITHEM, among students and alumni, and members of our community of CIOs, Chief Innovation Officers, of major European companies. Then we enriched it with analysis of more than 30 publicly available resources. Of the many resources we consulted, I especially want to recognize trendwatching.com. Trendwatching.com has been an especially valuable resource for us. Thank you for joining me today. Now come with me on our journey of exploration. In this first segment, we will look at what has happened to the major drivers of change: migrations, climate, the environment, global competition for resources, technological change, power shifts in the economy and the geopolitical landscape, diversifying lifestyles and values. For years, these have been slow drivers, drivers whose effects we saw measured in decades. But something fundamental has changed in the last 4 or 5 years. These drivers are still the same that they always were before, but now they've become increasingly disruptive. Let's look at some of them in a bit more detail. First of all, we have disruptive drivers in demographics. In the developed countries, births are going down, people live longer, while the exact opposite is happening in developing countries. And we have seen very disruptive flow of migrations, which are putting great strains on resources in the developed world, while at the same time being necessary to maintain the levels of well-being that these countries have achieved. A very explosive, disruptive mix, to say the least. We're finding disruptive drivers also, of course, in the environment. And it's not just global warming, which is already giving us the kind of flooding, fires, hurricanes, tsunamis, very much concentrated in short periods of time, unlike what we've seen ever before. But there's more. There's pollution. There's the increasing lack of drinking water. There's an aggression to the habitat. We're finding a diminution of the diversity of species. All of that is beginning to take a really terrible toll on our planet, of which, of course, we have only one. Economics. We're finding great disruptive changes in economics. We're seeing downsizing in companies, outsourcing, a growing concentration of a very few macro players in each sector. We're seeing increasing unemployment, and even where there's not more unemployment, we're seeing an increasing precariousness of work in general. Maybe most profound of all, we're living a huge, I would say unprecedented increase in inequality, with all the problems, social and otherwise, and of course economic, that entails. We're finding increasing levels of poverty and downward inflation. We're seeing adjusted medium discretionary income curve, instead of going up generation after generation, stabilizing and in many places beginning to go down. In many ways, this tragedy can be summed up as this may very well be the first generation that will live worse than their parents' generation. A really terrible thing to have to say. Politics has rarely been as disruptive as it is now. We're finding populisms, an increasing authoritarianism. Terms like fake news, post-truth have become common currency that everyone understands. This is not a good thing. We're finding increasing levels of corruption all over the world. We also find increasingly endogamous elites, a system more and more unable to respond to the final and fundamental problems of society. In Spain, for example, in many surveys we find that the number one problem that citizens identify is precisely the very, very poor quality of our political class and the corruption that is rife not only in Spain, but all around the world. Of course, technology has always been a disruptive driver as well. But technology in the last 20 years has given us levels of disruption, which even if the technology as such is positive, opens great fears in populations around the world for the social and economic impact these technological changes may have in the longer run. Let's quickly review them. They're quite well known. We get technological disruption in terms of digital technologies, everything from Internet of Things, virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, many others. But all technological disruption is not just digital. We're finding disruption in medicine, very positive. We're finding nuclear medicine. We're finding, in terms of energy supply, hydrogen energies, totally new ways of doing batteries. We're finding many other sources of disruption. And it's no exaggeration to say that technology has probably been the dominant driver in the last 20 years, with clearly no end in sight. And within this panorama of trends that have been with us pretty much forever, but becoming more and more accelerated and disruptive, suddenly COVID-19, the coronavirus, threw itself onto the world. And many people still think that this virus is basically a pulmonary virus, while in reality, we're now discovering that it is really should be considered more a vascular inflammatory syndrome that it causes. Denmark just slaughtered 17 million minks because they found a mutated form of the coronavirus. And although there's great news on the horizon in terms of vaccines, long-lasting vaccination is still undoubtedly a long way off. Let's look how these increasingly disruptive drivers impact on society, consumers, and how they affect consumption patterns. Clearly, these drivers have a profound impact on consumers, but they also have a profound impact on companies and on public administrations. The companies, in fact, are impacted from three sides. They're impacted frontally from these disruptive drivers immediately, but they also receive lateral impacts from the reactions both consumers and public administration have to these drivers. So it's really what you would call a triple whammy. Companies then respond with innovative initiatives, many of them at least, that in turn impact consumers and administrations. Our focus today and in other moments when we'll talk about megatrends is precisely on how these megatrends that result from the impact, direct and indirect, of these drivers interplay with marketing initiatives that come from companies. So we're going to explore the interaction between consumers impacted by these drivers and the way companies respond to them. In this introduction, we saw how the major drivers have in many ways turned more and more disruptive recently, how they have affected consumers, companies, and public administrations. In the next segment, we'll explore the first and maybe most explosive megatrend of all. Don't miss out. Thank you very much.